Chapter 1: The Psychology of Motivation. Have you ever wondered at the way certain people bring out the best in others? They seem to know how to get an extra effort from the people they lead. We have all known them. Some are teachers or heads of companies. Others are baseball managers or mothers. Frequently, without good looks or extraordinary intelligence, they seem to possess a knack for inspiring people. And this remarkable skill at the art of motivation makes them highly successful at most everything they do. On the other hand, there are those who seem to bring out the worst in us. When we are around certain people, we feel clumsy and inept and find ourselves acting in negative ways that puzzle us later. Their pep talks end up becoming lectures, and though they may intend to inspire us, they actually intimidate us. The sources of inspiration. My work as a psychotherapist has furnished me with opportunities to observe these various pulls we have on each other and to ponder these sources of inspiration. When I met people who were peak performers, I often asked, "What motivated you? Who first got you on the right track, and how did they do it?" In gathering this information and reading the biographies of great leaders, I began to see that in business, in politics, in family, indeed in any venture, motivation breaks down to two very important, powerful principles. It turns out that a coach like Bear Bryant, a businessman like Lee Iacocca, and a religious leader like Mother Teresa use many of the same tools for energizing their people, and their groups respond in very similar, predictable ways. In the succeeding chapters, we look at the stories of dozens of successful leaders and methods that have used to obtain an extraordinary effort from ordinary human beings. I hope to show how you can employ these methods in day-to-day relationships. The 12 guidelines contained in this book are quite simple. They can be mastered by anyone with enough desire to inspire others. I'm not saying that there are easy skills to learn, for changing our relational habits can be very difficult, and mastering the art of motivation takes a lot of hard work. But with enough persistence, anyone can become an expert in this field. Motivators are not born, they are made, and they are almost always self-made. The power of the motivator. We must deal immediately with a wrong-headed idea now circulating widely about this topic. It says that no one motivates anyone, and all that motivation must come from within. But think about the times when you have been your best. Was it not due in large part of the influence of some inspiring person? Perhaps it was a teacher who knew how to pull something extra out of you and got you so excited about a project that you stayed up most of the night reading, or a boss who could make fun and had a knack for putting together a team in which people found themselves producing beyond their usual capacities. Wellington reportedly said that when Napoleon was on the field, it was in balance, the equivalent of fighting against another 40,000 men. The fact is, we can be highly motivated by the right leader. When France fell to Hitler in June of 1940, it seemed that for the second time in 25 years, the lights were going out all over Europe. Germany immediately began preparations for an invasion of the British Isles, and the prospects of successful resistance looked very bleak. The Soviet Union stood aside. The United States was far from being ready to enter any war, and most military experts predicted that England, poorly armed and poorly prepared, would topple to an invasion within weeks. But the experts made those predictions without taking the measure of a 65-year-old politician who, after an erratic and frustrating career filled with failures, had finally been handed the post of Prime Minister on May 10th. The 7 remaining months of 1940 were a pivot in modern history. England, and perhaps the whole Western world, owes its existence to the ability of Winston Churchill to breathe hope into a despaired and frightened nation during those months. To appreciate the power of the motivator, one need only picture the families of Britain as they gathered in their living rooms and listened to Churchill thunder out from their radios, "The Battle of France is over. I expect the Battle of Britain is about to begin. Upon this battle depends the survival of Christian civilization. The whole fury and might of the enemy must very soon be turned on us. Hitler knows that he will have to break us on this island or lose the war. Let us therefore brace ourselves to our duties and so bear ourselves that, if the British Empire and its Commonwealth last for thousands of years, men will still say, 'This was their finest hour.'" Looking back on England's heroic defiance of Hitler, most would agree that indeed it was England's finest hour. But that heroism could have lain dormant in the British people had not Churchill been so successful at galvanizing their will. The longing for inspiration. History shows that in almost every arena, there is a vacuum waiting to be filled by some person who can impart vision and steer people's energies into the best endeavors. Some leaders assume that people are basically lazy and do not want to be inspired. That assumption can be heard in sales managers' voices when they say that nothing seems to build a fire under their salespeople, or in a teacher's lament, Harry is just not motivated. But there is no such thing as an unmotivated person, says R.J. Lukowski, a professor of education at the University of Wisconsin. It is more accurate to say, Harry is not motivated to learn with me. For Harry will spring out of bed at 3 o'clock on the morning of a fishing trip and display plenty of motivation. Watching factory workers hurry out of a parking lot at the end of a shift quickly dispels any notion that they are inherently lazy. They are in a rush to get to the evening activities, some of which will probably be more taxing than anything they've done at the factory. So the leader's challenge is not to take lazy people and transform them into industrious types. Rather, it is to channel already existing energies into the most worthwhile endeavors. People do not like being lethargic and bored. They will welcome a manager who can teach them to enjoy their work, or a teacher who will impart to them a love of learning that causes the school day to go swiftly. How one mother inspired her children. The Lazy Bee Ranch is comprised of 260 square miles of scrub brush on the New Mexico and Arizona border and has been in the Day family since 1881. When Harry and Ada Mayday were ready to have their first child, they traveled 200 miles to El Paso for the delivery, and Ada May brought her baby, Sandra, home to a difficult life. The 4-room adobe house had no running water, no electricity. There was no school within driving distance. One would have thought that with such limited resources, Sandra's intellectual future was slim. But Harry and Ada May were dreamers who did not allow themselves to be limited by their surroundings. Harry had been forced by his father's death to take over the ranch rather than enter Stanford University, but he never gave up hope that his daughter would someday study there. And Ada May continued to subscribe to metropolitan newspapers and to magazines such as Vogue and The New Yorker. When Sandra was 4, her mother started her on the Calvert method of home instruction and later saw that she went to the best boarding school possible. Sandra's brother Alan says that one summer their parents packed them in the car and they drove all the state capitals west of Mississippi. We climbed to the dome of every building until finally we had to come home, he said. Sandra did go to Stanford, then on to law school, and eventually to become the first woman Supreme Court Justice in the United States. On the day of her swearing in, the Day family was there, of course. During the ceremony, Alan watched her closely as she put on her robe, then walked to her seat among the justices. She looked around, saw the family, and locked her eyes right into ours, said Alan. That's when the tears started falling. What causes a woman like Sandra Day O'Connor to go so far? Intelligence, of course, and lots of inner drive, but much of the credit goes to the determined little ranch woman sitting in her adobe house at night, reading to her children hour after hour, and to parents scampering up the stairways of Capitol domes, their children in tow. Motivation is not manipulation. Before going any further, we must make it clear that the topic before us is not manipulation. In the last decade, a spat of books has been telling us how to get ahead by intimidating people and stepping on the bodies of our subordinates. You've wasted your money on this book and would be well advised to return it to the bookseller if you are looking for techniques twisting people into doing your bidding. This is a book on motivation, not manipulation. The difference is this. You are a manipulator when you try to persuade people to do something that is not in their best interest, but is in yours. You are a motivator when you find goals that will be good for both sides, then weld together a high-achieving, high-morale partnership to achieve them. Why every business person must be a psychologist. One's financial success is much less dependent on hard work and knowledge than it is on the ability to lead people. Many bright persons rise rapidly in their careers because of their high-tech knowledge, but once they arrive at a level where they have to succeed through efforts of others, they get mirrored down simply because they have not learned the art of multiplying themselves. One industrial psychologist says that promotions are 90% dependent on technical know-how for a rank-and-file worker. For promotions as supervisor, technical knowledge is 50%, and human relations are 50%. For promotions as executive, technical expertise is 20%, and human relations are 80%. An almost total switch in skills takes place as people rise higher on the management ladder. The German poet Goethe observed, "The greatest genius will not be worth much if he pretends to draw exclusively from his own resources." Yet this law is ignored by a surprising number of hard-working people whose careers have not been kissed by success. They failed to accomplish big things because they failed to master the art of inspiring others. Those who get ahead sometimes have limited gifts themselves, but their people consistently turn in superior performances. And that is because, though these leaders do not necessarily work long hours, when they do work, they use their time organizing and motivating people. Great corporate leaders understand human behavior rather than cybernetics of any functional specialty, says James Score, Executive Vice President of Holiday Inn Incorporated. Translated, what he is saying is that a proven motivator will make it to the top before a proven genius. When Andrew Carnegie hired Charles Schwab to administer his far-flung steel empire, Schwab became the first man in history to earn $1 million a year while in someone else's employ. Schwab was once asked what equipped him to earn $3,000 a day. Was it knowledge of steel manufacturing? Nonsense, snorted Schwab. I have lots of men working for me who know more about steel than I do. Schwab was paid such a handsome amount largely because of his ability to inspire other people. I consider my ability to arouse enthusiasm among the men the greatest asset I possess, he said, and any leader who can do that can go almost anywhere and name almost any price. Building high morale. Thus far, we have been discussing the art of motivation as a one-to-one skill, the impact of one personality on another. But for most of the people with whom we work, there is another set of influences operating, and unless the motivator learns how to control these influences, no amount of one-on-one leadership will be effective. I'm referring to the power of the peer group. A curious chemistry takes place when you put 3 or more people together to make a family, a class, or a corporation. Those people begin to exert complicated powers over each other. Some groups, for instance, seem prone to producing destructive electricity. A few disgruntled employees or a group of critics in a club, left unattended, can create a strong negative field in a hurry. Unless a leader is skilled in diffusing those influences, the whole organization can explode. How does one keep such negative feelings from gaining momentum? There are 2 ways. The first is a secret employed by all morale builders. They build into the group an allowance for conflict. They do not panic when negative emotions occurs. They expect it, and they are prepared for it. Morale problems rarely get out of hand for those leaders because they have constructed corridors of communication for the disgruntled student or the unhappy employee to use. In the chapters that follow, we will discuss at some length the art of managing conflict and how to get groups to cooperate with a minimum of sparks. When critical mass occurs in a group, there's a second secret used by skilled motivators. They carefully put together combinations of people that will ensure a positive mental set from the beginning. The principle is this: enthusiasm is conscious, and people are motivated when we place them in contact with other well-motivated people. Eventually, when the optimism reaches a high enough temperature, the fire becomes self-generating. So the wise leader, upon discovering people who are peak performers, will quickly put them in touch with each other. Like a burning charcoal, an enthusiastic person can ignite others and create a fine fire. Left alone, the flame will eventually go out. Let's take the example of company presidents or the heads of large volunteer organizations. If they depend on their enthusiasm alone to fire up their people, they will be moving about their organizations in a constant frenzy. But wise leaders use the dynamics of crowd psychology much more in meetings. They know that they can get 10 people more inspired at a meeting with the right tone than in 10 one-on-one conversations. So they construct a group of positive thinkers in regular contact with each other who will then keep each other's faith alive. At some point, critical mass occurs. A strange and wonderful thing can happen when such groups reach this critical mass. They generate an enthusiasm which is much greater than the sum of the parts. The power of this group spirit has been emphasized by several recent studies of companies such as 3M, Frito-Lay, Procter & Gamble, and IBM. The research shows that these companies have been able to succeed in good times and bad times because they build a distinctive culture within their organizations. The new employee in such companies learns that there is a way we do things here. This atmosphere of strongly shared objectives and values points people in the right direction, eliminates confusion, and saves time. Such esprit de corps exists in all successful families as well. Certain family units seem to generate a morale that sends kids out to function at levels far above average. Outsiders may make this mistake of crediting these children's success to inherited IQ, when actually it's due to far more than intelligence. It comes from the energy and enthusiasm that are generated within the family group. As the best corporations, a common culture is formed in these families. They join in striving for common goals, and they promote greatness in one another. The complexity of inspiration. No one knows all the reasons why one group gels into a successful team and another turns into a suicidal mob, nor do we know all the reasons some individuals have a desire to excel and others lack it. There are variables of energy and physiology and psychological history and of time and place. This book does not pretend that by using one magical technique you can turn a slow-learning child into a genius, or non-performing employee into a barn burner. What these principles will help you do is inspire people to make a greater effort than they would ever have attempted without you. For 12 years, the Green Bay Packers had won only 30% of their games, and by 1958, their record had dropped to a dismal 110. Then, in 1959, along came a new coach, Vince Lombardi. During Lombardi's 9-year reign, the Packers had 9 winning seasons, beat their opponents 75% of the time, and walked away with 5 NFL championships, including the first 2 Super Bowls. How does one account for such phenomenal turnaround? Frank Gifford says it was not Lombardi's knowledge, since several other coaches knew as much about strategy and tactics. Rather, it was his ability to motivate the players. He could get that extra 10% out of an individual, Gifford says. Multiply 10% times 40 men on the teams times 14 games in a season, and you're going to win. In this book, we are going to look at success stories of many leaders who, like Lombardi, knew how to obtain an extra effort from people around them. By using their principles, you should be able to get an extra 10% from your group, and that just may be the difference that wins the game.